There is a well-known study by Sheena Leingart and Mike Leopard called When Choice is Demotivating. And the core idea is something that most of us have felt in real life. More options do not always make choosing easier. And sometimes even more options, it makes us way less likely to choose at all. And I think that matters ultimately because a lot of people are blaming themselves for being indecisive, when in reality, sometimes it's just their nervous system that is getting overwhelmed by too many possibilities, by too much pressure, and not having enough internal clarity. So you can have all the options in the world and still feel completely disconnected from your own internal knowing, because clarity itself does not only come from more information. Sometimes clarity comes from learning how to listen differently.
Hey there, Evolver. If you have found this channel, you're probably someone who thinks deeply about life, growth, and the human mind. My name is Emilia, and this is a channel where we explore the psychology, neuroscience, and lived experience of what it actually means to evolve as a human being.
So in my work with individuals, couples, and leaders, decision-making is one of the clearest places where someone's inner system is revealing and showing of itself. Because the question is rarely only just, Emilia, what should I do? Underneath that, there are usually much deeper questions that are happening beneath the surface. Questions like, can I trust myself? What if I choose wrong? What happens then? What if someone in my choice gets disappointed along the way? What if I lose something? What if I regret it? What if my body knows something that my mind just doesn't want to or is ready to admit right now? And that is why decision-making can become literally so exhausting because people, they're really not just weighing choices and information. They're often negotiating with fear, with guilt, with hope, with pressure, with identity, and with their attachment to people, places, things, and ideas, and in that decision itself. And this is one of the reasons that I literally love working with decision-making and decision makers so much inside Evolve's ecosystem, because ultimately a decision, when we make that, it's rarely ever just the decision itself that the Evolvers are dealing with. It's never just a decision when you really look at the micro tunings of a decision. It reveals the relationship that someone has with their own inner authority. Can they hear themselves? Can they tolerate disappointing someone? Can they separate potential from evidence? And can they move slowly enough to tell the truth? That is the real work. That is where all of the decision-making pressure has people cracking or people coming and returning back to their inner voice, that inner authority. It's not just choosing the option, but becoming the kind of person who cannot choose without abandoning themselves. It's all about that becoming the kind of person who learns how to choose and not abandon themselves along with it. So in the last video at EVE, we talked about identity, and in all of our episodes, we have been touching on the layer of identity with every single episode. In last episode, if you haven't listened to that, go back. But ultimately, we talked about the idea that you become what you practice. In other words, what you repeat is who you become. And decision-making is one of those most powerful identity practices, quite frankly, there really ever is, because every single choice is reinforcing something. I like to share with my clients that every behavior is a vote for an identity. And so it has us thinking about what our practices are, and what we are reinforcing Is it something that is in alignment with who we aspire to become? Or is it in alignment and reinforcing and voting for an older identity that no longer serves us? So while every single choice is reinforcing something, it's kind of falling in these categories of either self-trust or self-abandonment, discernment or urgency, values or pressure, evidence or fantasy. So this episode, it's all about learning how to choose in a way that is strengthening your relationship with yourself. And this is something that so many people will come to me about, and they'll ask, how do I develop a deeper sense of respect for myself? How do I navigate this decision and feel really good about it in the aftermath when there is grief, there's loss, there's challenging things that are kicking up with this decision? And here's this core distinction that I want you to hold while we talk about this topic. Fear is usually urgent. It's like pushing you and it feels frenetic. Discernment is usually clear. Fear in the nervous system is saying, decide right now, right now, right now, or everything else is going to fall apart. While discernment, on the other hand, and on the other side, if you look at like a spectrum, right? Discernment is always saying, slow down. Look at what is true. Fear often wants certainty well before action. While as discernment itself can move with enough clarity, even when uncertainty is still present. Now, fantasy is different from both. And I want to bring this into the equation because we're going to talk about that triad of fear, discernment, and fantasy. Fantasy will say, choose based on who this could become. Discernment will ask, what is the evidence of what this actually is? So, in that triad between fear, discernment, and fantasy, I want us to kind of breathe this into some real world practical examples that I see happening time and time again. So the first one, obviously, when it comes to big decisions, usually buckets itself around relationship decisions. Now, because we are human beings, we inherently have this need for belonging. And so any decision that might have an impact that even remotely in a Hail Mary's distance come close to negatively impacting someone that we care about, even if it's like a 3 out of 10 level of care, our fear, our fantasy, and the discernment triad will get kicked up. So the decisions that we make really do kick some stuff up. So let's talk about that. So in the example that I want to bring forward, let's say you're trying to decide whether to stay in a relationship. Now, there might be one part of you that's saying, but I love them so much, right? Picture like a friendship or an intimate relationship. And those are the two scenarios. But this one, I'm going to kind of go down the intimate relationship bucket, if you will, or example, if you will, right? So a part of you is saying, but I love them. And then there's another part that's kind of conflicting with that and saying, but I do not feel emotionally safe with this person. And then another part kicks up and comes in and says, but what if they change? What if they change, right? And then all of a sudden, another part pops in and says, wait, hold on, time out. What if I regret leaving this person? That, all of those questions, all of those parts kicking up in a decision point or on your route to making a decision, all of those question marks can get really confusing very quickly. And a fear-based decision might be, I'll stay because I cannot tolerate the grief of leaving this person. Whereas a fantasy-based decision might sound something along the lines of, well, I'm going to stay because I know who they could become. I've been there. Whereas a discernment-based decision, it will ask, what is the pattern that makes me feel unsafe? What has changed through evidence? What happens to my nervous system in this relationship during this XYZ argument? Can I be more myself here or less? That is not cold. That is honest. One of my favorite words is candor. Being honest with yourself or having candor with your experience in relationships allows you to make better decisions for relationships that support you and who you aspire to become. So discernment itself does not ask you to ignore love outright and entirely, but discernment will ask you not to use love as a reason to ignore reality. Again, discernment does not ask you to ignore love. It will ask you not to use love as a reason to ignore reality. In other words, the evidence that maybe a part of you wants to completely deny is there. So you can apply that to an intimate relationship. You can apply that to a friendship. You can apply that to pretty much any interpersonal relationship. As you apply that, what are you noticing in your nervous system come up? So let's breathe this into a second practical example where the biggest pattern, second to the relationship dynamic that I see, is in the career and business decisions that we make. So in career and business, if we were to explore that territory, a leader or founder or someone on a team is trying to decide whether to say yes to an opportunity. And on paper, that opportunity, it looks good. Let's say it's a promotion. Let's say maybe it's coming to another organization. It's going towards something that on paper sounds better, right? More visibility. Maybe they have more money. There's a bigger salary, bigger bonus, bigger options, whatever. More access, more status, right? On paper, that sounds and looks really good. But this leader is having a moment where something kind of feels off in their nervous system. Maybe the timing is wrong. Maybe the values are a little mismatched. Maybe the opportunity itself requires way too much self-abandonment on the weekends, after regular hours, in ways that this person really never believed would be worth that level of quote unquote paper pushing. Maybe it expands the business, but it dilutes the mission that they're aligned to because of who they are. A pressure-based decision will say to them, I should say yes because it looks like the smart thing to do. A values-based decision will ask us, does this actually align with what we're building? At Evolve, this is the kind of discernment that I care deeply about. Not just the question, hey, can we do this, right? When our team is navigating a situation, the question is not, can we do this? As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with a team member recently, and I had said the question of can, whether it's possible or not, that doesn't need to be here for this exploratory conversation. Because the can comes way after the question, should we do it? Should what we're contemplating right now be in existence because of who we are, what values we have, the mission that we have in this world? And ultimately, what does saying yes here train inside the systems that we have at Evolve? So not every good opportunity that we receive will be inherently an aligned opportunity. And that's something that I think a lot of people, actually, I know because I'm behind the scenes with a lot of individuals on paper, right? If they were to take the opportunity to their friends or to their family or to a coworker, their coworker, friend, or family might be like, that sounds like awesome, right? But then you go ahead and make a decision and it feels out of alignment with your values. That's going to be a hollow decision. I see that happening all the time with leaders who aren't building that own inner authority and are choosing what looks good on paper at the expense of their values. And ultimately, that always comes to get them in one way, shape, or form. So the last example that I want to bring forward, outside of the interpersonal relationships, outside of the business and leadership example, and the third one where I see the most volume, if you will, the most traction, the biggest pattern is in our personal growth decisions. And when we talk about this aspect of personal growth, I'm just going to kind of lean into the fact that there are more people that are exploring what personal growth looks like to them and feels like to them than there ever has been. And so I'm talking to y'all who are in that bucket. Because you might be likely, honestly, if you're watching Eve, you're on a personal growth journey, right? That might weave into the professional development space, that might weave into the mental health space. But at the end of the day, you're here learning about yourself, others, and the world around you because you are on a personal growth journey. Let's say, for example, you're deciding whether to confront someone, set a boundary, maybe rest, wait, leave, speak, or take action. Insert whatever person you want in this scenario. And when you're thinking about this decision, your options, for lack of better words, your mind is doing the thing that your mind always does, which is spiraling. What if I'm overreacting? What if I'm wrong? What if what I say here and now makes things worse? This is where embodied discernment truly matters. Not because the body is always automatically right, but because the body always has data. Tightness, expansion, relief, constriction, dread, pressure, calm, a sense of groundedness. So discernment in this scenario means that you do not worship the feeling or the signal or the body sign that's being sent here. It also means you do not dismiss it. You listen to it as information, a data point, a signal, a sign. Because your body is not the whole decision maker, but it is, in fact, an incredibly important part of our decision-making process team, right? So the way in which I see it, discernment ultimately is one of those most sneaky and wildly underrated forms of self-respect. People who have high levels of self-respect, you will find that they also have high levels of discernment. And more often than not, those two go hand in hand. They are self-reinforcing. So when you do something that involves discernment, the practice of discernment, likely that is increasing the self-respect. Because when you become, or as you are in the process of becoming discerning, you inherently are stopping to make choices only to relieve discomfort. You stop letting urgency pretend to be wisdom. You literally stop confusing potential with evidence, and you refuse to let that confusion exist within your nervous system. You refuse to have denial be a part of the equation, and you stop treating every open door like a divine assessment or a divine assignment. Discernment itself will let you say, finally, this may be good, but it is not mine. This may be familiar, but it is not aligned. This may even be possible for me, but it is not wise. And that is power. That is personal power that is being named and activated and returned back to when you are able to make decisions from a standpoint of discernment. So, let's talk about this from a nervous system layer. For those of you who are geeking out on this and want to explore the deeper nervous system at play here, let's look at how decision-making becomes harder when the system itself is activated. Because when you are in a fight, you are likely deciding from control, right? So if you think about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flop, any of those nervous system states. In other words, the way in which your nervous system is responding to stress or challenging moments or moments of decision or leading up to a decision, that's happening. What's happening in your nervous system is there's stress, right? Some of it is good stress. Some of it is not so great. But when you are in a fight response system, you are likely deciding from a standpoint of control because that control is the antidote to that fight response. When you are in a flight, aka you're running away, trying to get away from whatever the stress is, in other words, your decision or that hard decision that you have to make, you are likely deciding from a place of escaping, escapism. When you are in a freeze, right, picture the old deer in the headlights, you are likely avoiding this decision altogether. When you are in a fawn, You may be choosing whatever keeps someone else more comfortable. And when you're in a flop state, I'm just going to say it, any of these are game, but more than likely, you're not choosing at all. So before asking, what should I choose? Sometimes the better first question is far more along the lines of, what state am I choosing from right now? What state am I currently in? Because any dysregulated state can make fear sound like clarity. And that's a scary part about decision making. Most of us don't realize that we are making decisions from a fear or stress-based nervous system. And that's why when we make decisions, we are literally afraid of what process is involved in making a decision in the first place. Because what comes after that decision is all of this crap, all this gunk in our nervous system. We're maybe not aligned, or we regret making that decision because we were making that decision out of a flight or a freeze standpoint. And this is where a lot of the decision, quote unquote, advice or guidance or what have you becomes, in my opinion, way too shallow. Because a lot of people will say, trust your gut, just trust your gut, right? So if we look at that for a hot sec, just trust your gut. Now, okay. Right. What does that even mean? Especially if your gut has been tapped into things that actually don't help decision making. What if your gut is overly sensitive to fear and therefore is always putting you in a stressed out flight nervous system pattern? That means that you trusting your gut is making decisions from a flight, fight, freeze, or fawn standpoint. So maybe you're not even able to trust your gut because that hasn't really worked out well for you. Or let's say, let's just, sit down, make a pros and cons list, right? Both of them can help. Both of those suggestions absolutely can help, but neither is enough on its own. And that's the thing, because your gut, ultimately, it might be carrying old fear. And as a matter of fact, more than I would like to admit, there's more fear that is being carried by our guts than we even realize. And your mind, more than likely, it is rationalizing what your nervous system has already decided. So, discernment requires integration with the body, the mind, your values, evidence, timing, pattern. And we need to take that one layer deeper. Now, let's go to the identity layer. You cannot have this conversation about making decisions and being an effective decision maker, heck, improving your decision-making process without actually adjusting or navigating how decision impacts identity. And decision-making changes our identity because, like I said, every decision is voting for something, right? Every decision is training your nervous system. Every decision is teaching you whether you can trust yourself or not. And there's very few area in between. You either trust yourself or you don't. That's why when I talk about decision making, there's a lot of binary and all or nothing cognitive distortions that present themselves in the decision making process that many people are well unaware of. So if you repeatedly are choosing against your own knowing, right, the intuitive knowing, your system is learning through your behavior of said decision that my signals do not matter. But when you make one honest choice, even a hard one, even it's small, your system learns contrary to what it's been taught. I can listen to myself, I can tolerate discomfort, and I can even choose alignment over approval. So all of those are training your nervous system, the identity that you carry, that you're reinforcing, that you can be with reality itself. You don't have to deject it, deny it, etc. You can be with reality itself. And that is how self-trust grows, by not avoiding the reality that you're in, by returning yourself to your own inner authority. And for me, this is why ultimately the goal, when we talk about this episode and what this episode really means, it's not to become someone who never doubts. That is just honestly not realistic. So when we hear those like surface level, just trust your gut, do a pro and con list, that's essentially what that's communicating on an unconscious level. Never doubt, right? That's just, it's not realistic because we naturally will have a doubting part if we struggled with decision makings or if we've ever made a bad decision before. So the goal is instead to become someone who can actually stay with themselves long enough to hear what is true. Long enough to hear what is true for you, someone who does not rush just to escape discomfort, someone who does not outsource, as a matter of fact, every single decision to other people's opinions. And might I add, someone who does not outsource every decision to ChatGPT, Claude's, your AI opinions, inputs, etc. And I have to put that in there because honestly, a lot of people are doing that right now to their own detriment, outsourcing every decision to other people or AI opinions. That is eroding self-trust. So instead, we want you to become someone who can actually hold complexity without completely collapsing into confusion. So to me, that is mature self-trust. So, okay, Emilia, I hear what you're saying, and I want to start to kind of bring this into my world. I'm feeling spicy, and I feel like I want to bring this into my world, and I want you to give me the goodies. So how do I do this? How do you teach your clients to do this? How do we navigate and become not only better decision makers, but how do we make sure that we are making embodied, self-trusting decisions and taking messy action to build a better decision-making process with our mind, with our bodies, with the heart, with the values, XYZ? I'm so glad you asked. All right, so we're going to break this down into 3 steps. As always, every single person is going to look a little bit differently because your nervous systems are a wee bit different given your experiences that you've had. So I put that caveat there. But these 3 steps applied in your life are going to yield the similar results as you try and attempt and continuously take messy action. It's not going to be perfect from the get, and you can expect that. So we're going to start with step number 1, which the basics that requires is for you to name the state that you are in. So I want you to ask yourself, am I activated? Am I grounded? Am I afraid? Do I feel pressured? Do I feel hopeful? Do I have a little bit of resentment in me? Am I clear or am I collapsed right now? We do not want to decide from a state that you cannot name. So, number 1 is to name the state that you are in. Number 1 builds for number 2. Step number 2 is for you to separate the evidence from fantasy. Now, what the heck do I mean by that? I want you to ask yourself, what do I know through repeated behavior? What am I hoping will become true over time with XYZ action, with XYZ person? And I want you to ask yourself, what am I afraid to admit is already true? Whew. Evidence is what has happened. Fantasy is what you are emotionally attached to happening. That step number 2 is going to hit all types of denial that your nervous system might have been carrying. Just going to put that little asterisk there. So if it feels like discomfort, or it feels like a rub, or it's frustrating as hell, you're actually doing the right thing to step number 2. So step number 1 builds to step number 2, builds to step number 3, which is where we choose the next aligned action. This is not going to be the forever decision, not one big, huge decision, but the next aligned action. Ask the question, pause the yes, gather more data, set the boundary, tell the truth. Take the step. because discernment often grows through honest movement. And your nervous system grows in alignment with that honest movement. Remember, I mentioned candor earlier? Our nervous systems they bend to where the light is. Our nervous system will bend to where we are honest with ourselves. Bending in a way that means that it's developing, that it's growing. And discernment grows through honest movement. So take that next small aligned action for you. And this is where I invite you to think about what that is for you. So whatever got kicked up in this video, whether it be the interpersonal relationship, the business decision, the work decision, or maybe your personal growth journey that you're on, take steps 1 through 3 and ask yourself, what is that next micro aligned action for you? Because discernment is not having perfect certainty. It is learning how to ultimately choose without abandoning your body, your values, your evidence, and most importantly, your truth. And sometimes the most powerful decision, honestly, is not the loudest one. In my own personal experience, it has been the ones behind the scenes that matter most to me. And it's the one that lets you stay in integrity with yourself. So lean into it, give it a try, and let me know in the comments what resonated the most with you.
And if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you want to actually go a little bit further in the specific practical application in your world, join me and other evolvers at EVE Reflections, where we will dig into this together as a community, where you're not alone and where you are working on this with other evolvers. Click the link in the show notes. You'll get access to that. And I'm excited to continue this work together as we evolve together. Take care, everyone. Until next time, keep evolving.